Ba-da-ba-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba. All right. Promoter 101. 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 Promoter 101.
Adam Wilkes with AEG, based in Asia, and I'm on Promoter 101.
Welcome, dear friends, to the Promoter 101 podcast. Joining us now, my good friend W. Luke Pierce. Luke?
Dan, what a somber way to begin the first podcast of the year, 2021. We're here. We made it. So glad of all of you to be listening today, and welcome back. The first episode of 2021 of Promoter 101. And we have a great one today. We're going to be joined by Alex Crothers. He's the founder of Higher Ground in Burlington, Vermont, as well as the co-owner of the State Theater, the Port City Music Hall, and Thompson's Point in Portland, Maine. We're going to hear about the vibe in New England, what's going on from early days with Fish and from work with the Venco and Oceaga. A lot of great stuff covered in that interview. Stay tuned for a little bit later.
Plus, we'll have a NIVA update from Dana Frank herself right here on Promoter 101.
Dana Frank, NIVA, NITO, bringing it home in the big federal stimulus bill. Can't wait to talk about that. And away we go with episode 222 of the Promoter 101 podcast, starting right now.
Anton Lockwood from DHP Family, and I'm on Promoter 101.
Of the week.
It's podcast pandemic time, and there's just news all over the place. Luke, what's going on out there?
Well, Dan, I think I would be really remiss if I didn't talk about the day that the music business opened the proverbial kraken and let you into the world. This was the first year during this week here, 10 years ago at Polestar, that you ever moderated a panel. Polestar Live panel with you, Andrea Johnson, our friends Rick Farrell, partner Jason Zink, David Britz, Andrew Goodfriend, and Bill Rogers. Where was that? Was that in New York?
No, we were at LA Live. Very excited about that first opportunity to make an ass of myself, and lots of good sports up there, some of my best friends. So really, really fun, and shocked every time when they invite us back to let us do it again.
So this is like a little bit of Steiny origin story right here, right? Like we're talking about the beginnings of it. Was this like a wild panel? Did you bring anything crazy that you wore or have any crazy stunts that you did that year? I mean, how quickly did you escalate to Peter Pan outfits and shots of tequila during panels? Well,
first of all, the Truth or Patron to bring back the shots element was actually invented by Brian Hill. It was his idea, and that showed up for the first time in a panel the following year, and that's the same panel where I wore the infamous referee outfit to the panel. But no, I was more just moving around and fast questions and really bringing the questions out, not just letting people off the hook, like asking the hard questions and calling bullshit and moving it fast and really picking up the pace.
Glad that every story has indeed a beginning, and yours starting on a pretty big stage there in Polestar. A pretty good memory.
Yeah, it was nice, because I don't think there'd be a podcast today if it wasn't for that first panel.
Important day to remember then. We should absolutely stamp this as some sort of Promoter 101 holiday and recap this every year. I think we need to go back to this in 2022 again.
Big dates in Promoter 101 history. Those moments where people actually let us have a microphone and have our own voice. It's fun.
It is a nice thing. Little did they know you would hold on to that microphone for a while.
Suckers.
Got them. What idiots.
Luke, I wanted to ask you about what happened this week with social media platforms. Now, we saw Donald Trump get locked out of all of his social media accounts across basically every platform in the matter of days. I'm curious, as a manager, what if this were to happen to one of your acts? This is how you communicate with your fans. What if this moves on from a political standpoint for an artist? Like, do the digital media platforms have so much power that they could suddenly decide that you don't have that access anymore? Is that a thing?
Well, I mean, to the degree that we saw deplatforming happen is people are talking about this week, which is basically the restraint of an individual on a platform, whether it be suspension, removal, or just shutting down of some sort of way of communicating with fans, yeah, that's an absolute risk, and it happens to a lesser degree in terms of changes in algorithm on a daily basis on many other platforms we have to use. Social media to search all has their own governing algorithms that can really mess up a lot of your strategy and plans if you're not careful with it. But to the degree that we saw it this week, Donald Trump being removed from Twitter, which is surprising that that's the bastion of free speech hope in America, shutting things down. That's never a good sign when Jack Dorsey's leading the charge on something. But then on Facebook and Instagram and their platforms, and more recently on YouTube. So what I think is scary about some of these things, and what may be an opportunity for artists, is that you're shutting down one place for your fans to find you, but generally those audiences find another place to find you. And it may be further away in a political sense on some fringe platforms. With Parler being shut down, there's deeper corners of the internet that people are flocking to for this particular interest in politics. And I see a world where probably the same thing happens with artists. And I think what happens during that time is actually an intensifying of a relationship with an artist or some sort of community leader in the instance of politics, which actually may be a more profitable or direct connection venture for artists, maybe more dangerous for society when political leaders do it. But the further away you go from mainstream conversations, whether it be on artists that are using Discord channels or more community-driven platforms, I think the more intense the connection with the artist actually becomes. And so deplatforming or the risk of changing platforms for artists sometimes isn't maybe necessarily a bad thing. It forces your fans into a different place where they have more direct lines to you. So
I could kind of envision a thing where you just become so dependent on that relationship through Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, and all of a sudden these companies decide to monetize that relationship where they charge you a fee to continue that relationship after you built your base up, which I don't know that would ever happen, but like it really could, since once they see how dependent you are on it, maybe there'd be a gate they throw up there. Like you run that risk when you have that relationship under that format, right?
Absolutely. It's the garden wall effect in social media all the time anyways. You're playing in somebody else's sandbox, and, very often you can change the size, the shape, or the whatever that sandbox in analogous perspective to how far your reach is as a platform, or how much you may need to use paid advertising on a platform to reach your fans. All that stuff becomes a consideration for tech companies in a late stage anyways. So,
but I'm guessing you don't think that that's financially going to happen, that this was an isolated scenario around politics, and probably won't lead to a financially charging medal, and won't lead to just randomly knocking off artists off sites.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take a page out of Nathan Hubbard, who had a great post I saw today saying something like, "I'm not a constitutional scholar and no one wants to hear your opinion anyways, dummy." And I'll preface it with the fact that I am not a constitutional scholar by any means. And so I don't really know what defines speech or not online. But I think if you're in the business of working with an artist who is spreading extremist lies, you're probably not at much of a risk of being, kicked off a platform unless you're doing something that violates more of the decency side of their rules. So it's not probably really a practical concern for 99.99% of artists and their teams out there in the world, but certainly for the folks that subscribe to that kind of stuff, you're probably going to have a problem. It's seemingly right now they've removed something like 60,000 Twitter accounts in the last 10 days, and I don't see that stopping with some people that have kind of supported or followed along in some of the political antics that have been happening in the last 3 weeks. Be interesting to stay tuned to it. For those of you that are having that problem, I don't know what to say. You probably were managing an artist who had some crazy thoughts anyways. So,
all right, and Natalia is no longer at UTA. What do you know about that?
Natalia Natoskin leaving UTA for Primary Wave to join as a partner and their chief creative officer. This is a big move for Natalia, who's been at the head of TAG and then UTA for in the agency world for about 15 years now. And as one of the only leading women at music agencies right now, I think that's a big move for Primary Wave and grabbing up a clearly very talented executive in the move, and kind of leaves UTA with some questions on what the next line for leadership is. So it'll be interesting to see with a spot like that open, what kind of hire is made to, fill that void over at UTA.
Well, she's certainly a badass, and we're a big fan of her here at Promoter 101 and wish her the best in her new gig.
Totally.
Hi, this is Bruce Solar from APA. I'm about to tell you some very, very secret stuff on Promoter 101.
Very exciting news. Of course, NIVA and NIVA have come together to pass the Save Our Stages Act as part of the stimulus bill that was recently passed here. And very exciting news for live music venues, operators, even representatives, managers like myself, agents. So here to talk a little bit about what the next steps are for this very important bill is NIVA founder and the First Avenue's CEO, Dana Frank.
very excited to have the president of the NIVA board from First Avenue, the one and only Dana Frank. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thanks, Dan. Happy 2021. 2020 wonderful.
Well, it seems like it's starting off kind of wonderful. I mean, the bill is passed for Save Our Stages. Is everybody rich now? How does this work?
So the bill was passed as part of the COVID relief bill. It was signed by President Trump after a harrowing few days. And now it is in, I would say, the mid stages of getting implemented by the SBA, the Small Business Administration. So we are waiting for the rules and the regulations and kind of the SBA's interpretation of the bill to come out. And then obviously waiting for the applications to come out, hopefully shortly thereafter.
The rumor seems to be that the language says something like 45% of the gross from 2019 could funnel back into some of these companies. Does that sound right?
Yep, it's 45% of a company's 2019 gross earned revenue. So for nonprofits, they have contributed, which is like donations, and then earned revenue, which is money that you earn by producing events and selling goods.
So if something like Swallow Hill in Colorado or something did a series, only the money they brought in from actually doing work as opposed to a donation grant, the grant wouldn't be matched per se.
Exactly. Yeah, it's they reported on their 990 forms. There's rules and such about what contributed and what earned revenue is.
That's awesome. But this is spread out between a number of organizations. The $15 billion doesn't show up in NIVA's account overnight. This $15 billion is spread out between a bunch of different organizations, correct?
Yeah. So no money goes to NIVA, right? Like the SBA is administering it. It goes directly from the government to the entities and the companies.
So you guys don't have to actually decide who's getting the money. You guys have helped lobby as a group, but you never actually have to touch any of that money and administrate any of it.
Oh, yeah. We have no hand in determining who gets funding or how much or who is ineligible. It's by the SBA and the legislative intent of the bill.
So what's the next step? How quickly can people start to expect to see money?
So we're hoping that the application is released, by early February, I would think. There's a rumor that the applications are coming out on Tuesday. We don't think that Tuesday, January 18th, we don't think that's realistic. We're hoping to get the rules and regs by next couple weeks, and then the applications shortly thereafter. So early February. The way the bill was written, the hardest hit businesses have priority access. The reasoning being if you're down 98% in revenue and there's no access to capital out there, you're probably a few days away from going out of business and you really need those funds ASAP. So everybody can apply, but the SBA will prioritize based on the language in the bill, which is those with 90% gross revenue loss will be eligible for funding in the first 2 weeks. Those with 70% or greater gross revenue loss will be eligible in weeks 3 and 4. And then after that, it opens up to all entities that qualify.
And anybody that gets funds, this is completely forgivable debt, right? They don't have to repay this. It's seen as more of a grant and you give back, right? It's not something that they have to pay back.
No, it's a grant. It's a grant. It can only be spent on certain eligible expenses like rent and payroll, such like that, with yearly limits like the PPP program. So, like I said, like no one's getting rich off this. Legally, they can't put it in their pockets or go buy a boat or anything like that. It can be used to stop some of the bleeding and backstop some of the expenses that have just been piling up over the last 10 months that we've been closed.
This is amazing that you guys were able to have this revenue flow back. But now that NIVA has come together in this moment of COVID, will the organization continue past COVID? It seems like you guys have got a good organization that you've built now. Is that going to live on?
Oh, absolutely. 100% structured to be a long-standing trade association for independent venues and promoters. On top of the original 5-member board, we just added unbelievable new board members. Amy Madrigali from the Troubadour, Grace Blake from Iridium in New York, Andre Perry from Iowa City, and Audrey Fick-Schaefer from 930 IMP.
So expanding out. It's good to have somebody in that DC market that understands the political game. It's a good move. So when do we get to see doors open and music come back, in your opinion?
Oh my God. What do you think?
I was kind of hoping you'd know.
Dr. Fauci said Q4, right? With masks. Everyone's hoping we get some kind of summer season, right? Even at lower capacity or something outdoors this summer would be nice. I think just to bring joy and shared experience back into our ecosphere, that would be pretty amazing. Indoors, full capacity. Hopefully end of this year, right? What do you think?
It just seems like such a pendulum. Like one day it sounds like we're back in business in 6 weeks. And in other days it's like 2024 is definitely going to be good. So it's somewhere in between, hopefully sooner than later.
Let's see how the vaccine rollout goes, right? Hopefully if President Biden gives 100 doses in 100 days, I think we're in really, really good shape. If it keeps going at this track.
100 million?
100 million. Yeah, thank you.
We seem to be moving in the right direction. Revenue flowing into all of these companies, these venues, these promoters that need it, agencies, everyone that's going to see revenue and help our industry find its way to the other side. Every dollar is going to help secure our industry have a tomorrow. And what NIVA and NITO and all of these other trade organizations have been able to do to secure by lobbying and bringing this together was unparalleled in our industry.
It was a bright, shining light in an abysmal, just the darkest of years, to work across the industry, right, with NITO and YouTube and Spotify and the unions and everybody who really had a vested interest in seeing our businesses reopen, because it's an existential crisis. There was no guarantee that these venues were going to reopen. Absolutely nothing made it a sure thing that we were going to have at least a club level circuit live music after this. So hopefully we secured the future and then we can get on to thinking, okay, now that we can say we're going to survive, like what can help people thrive and come back even stronger, more equitable, better rounded, more employee friendly, more artist friendly industry. At least that's our goal.
I saw a release just the other day about emergency grants that NIVA was doing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So we started the Emergency Relief Fund probably July because we just had these venues who were calling and really desperate shape. And they're like, we're hopeful that federal relief is coming, but we just can't wait until then. And at the same time, we had a lot of funders and folks coming to us saying, we want to support the hardest hit. How do we do that? So we set up the ERF with the Giving Back Fund, a fiscal sponsor, kind of a neutral third party. And there was a neutral third party board of jurors. So no one at NIVA was involved with seeing financials or seeing the applications. And then they went through and assessed the need and awarded grants. I think we awarded $3 million in the first round. We have about 6 times that in terms of need. So it's not like this solves the problem by any stretch of the imagination, but hopefully 150 or so venues are able to make it through until their SVO grant comes through.
That's amazing. Every venue that got those funds that was able to make it one more week or one more month or able to get to that federal grant money that's coming that may not have made it, like that changes our music industry forever. And you guys are keeping those things afloat. That's amazing.
Thanks. It was a heavy lift. I mean, we started from nothing, right? Dan, like 10 months ago, there was nothing, wasn't even like basic communication really between most of these members. So we had to build everything from scratch, the organizational structure, the board, the communication streams, relationships, et cetera. So everyone's been working their tushes off.
So how are you holding up personally throughout this thing, waiting for the vaccine and riding out the pandemic? How are you holding up?
I'm okay. We're healthy. My son Rex here is healthy. We've been, holed up at home in Minnesota, doing lots of sledding, trying to get outdoors in winter to keep our mental health semi-optimistic as possible. My parents were able to get their first shot of the vaccination. They're 75 or so in Florida. So that is like I think I cried. It was a pretty mind-blowing moment, but doing the best we can for sure. How are you and the family?
Family is good. I'm enjoying this togetherness time and, actually hearing about friends getting the vaccine or their family members getting the vaccine or seeing our medical friends in the field on Facebook posting with the shot in their arm. Like, it's cool. It's happening. It's not happening as fast as any of us want, but it's happening. It's the right direction for sure. It's all good news.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a light, right? Like for the first time, I think, and, mid-December-ish, our industry started to see a little bit of some kind of optimism and some kind of hope. And so that is just grateful for that. Grateful to be thinking, we might get to see live music again. I mean, maybe, right? Like at some point we're going to actually get to see a show. That thought is kind of keeping me upbeat most days.
So my last question before I let you go, I had heard one of the independent venues ask yesterday how they get involved with NIVA and get some of those funds that were in the grant. If somebody wasn't a member of NIVA and they're a venue, are they eligible for the same grant money?
Yeah. Again, NIVA itself has no hand in distributing the funds or determining eligibility or determining funding, right? That's all going through the SBA. However, if a venue or promoter or festival is eligible for NIVA membership, they can sign up on our website at nivassoc.org NIVA.org. And then we will keep them up to date, right? So like, when does the application open? What kind of documentation might I need? Maybe more direct Q&A, it enters into the community of other folks applying for grants so that people can talk about best practices and timeline and everything like that. But we have no hand in we can't help people actually get the money. We can just give them information on how they can get the money.
So you're a catalyst.
Facilitator, educator, informer.
But it's not too late. If you want to get involved, you can still get involved, and there's still help.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my God. Like I said, NIVA has such a long lifespan beyond just this grant. I think it can help folks in future advocacy, but also in other programs like literacy programs, education, maybe some like group insurance and group services, etc.
Well, I can't thank you enough for making time, and congratulations on the success that you guys have had to lobby that bill all the way through. It looked a little scary at the end with what was going on with some of the politics, but so thrilled to see it happening, and the money's going to start rolling through soon. You guys did an amazing job with that.
Thanks, and thanks for all your help.
Promoter 101 with Dayne Frank from NIVA.
Thanks again to the First Avenue's Dayne Frank, right here on Promoter 101.
Hey, this is Charlie from Crescent Ballroom, Stateside Present, and the new Van Buren Theater. I'll be a guest on Promoter 101 when I attend my first Polestar Live, and hopefully I'm alive to tell you all about it.
Tweets of the week.
Dan, of course, it would not be Promoter 101 if we didn't talk about some of your tweets. So early in 2021, you've been online, you've been busy here, Dan. Let's start with this one. 2021 just days away. I'm officially seeking a new social media nemesis. Seriously worthy opponents only need apply.
A little playful way to end the year, but I am seriously looking for new nemesis. So, send us an email and apply within.
If you're looking to pick a fight, at the Jew on Twitter. How about this one? Doing something good never hurt anyone, even if you got no money for it. That's a quote from Bernie Brillstein.
This is an amazing book. Where Did I Go Right? You're no one in Hollywood unless somebody wants you dead, by Bernie Brillstein. Read this book, or get the audiobook even better, because the way he speaks and delivers his message is, Luke, I binged this book in like 6.5 hours. It was such a great way to spend Sunday.
I didn't know he did an audiobook for it. The book is great. It's one of those books you put up there with Jerry Weintraub's You Know I'm Dead When I'll Stop Talking, his book as well too. But these are just two great ones, and Bernie was just one of the great ones out there.
I'm actually in the middle of Jerry's book right now, and it really is good. He's doing the Elvis Presley deal with the Colonel. That's exactly where I am in the book right now. So I'm excited about that.
So many great reads, so many life lessons in that book. It's a breeze to read too. There's just so many awesome stories in that guy's life. So both him and Bernie, just two of the big, huge names in their day, and have so many cool stories and so many lessons. Definitely read that book. That'll do it for Tweets of the Week. Make sure you keep up with Dan and all of his book recommendations. Head over to Twitter. He's at the Jew.
This is Arielle Hyatt from Cyber PR on the Promoter 101 podcast.
In our featured interview this week was a New England native. He's the founder of Higher Ground in Burlington, Vermont. He's also the co-owner of the State Theater, Port City Music Hall, and Thompson's Point in Portland, Maine. We've got a very special quarantine sessions with Alex Crothers.
For right now, we've got one of the biggest independents in the game, all the way from that top corner in the U.S., Higher Ground's own Mr. Alex Crothers. Welcome to the podcast, my brother.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Historically, acts love playing the Higher Ground. What is it about that venue that acts love so much? What have you guys done to really embrace the acts?
So Higher Ground started in 1998. I was 22 years old. I didn't know what I was doing. And one of the things we had to learn real quickly was, as I booked anything I could get my hands on that would actually take the time to pull out a map and drive up to Burlington, Vermont and find it, was we realized we just had to differentiate ourselves. And at the time, the easiest way to do that was through hospitality and taking care of the artists, and that's everything from greeting them when they got there and providing them a hot meal and good production and nice people and nice staff. So, that's kind of what we founded the club on, and that's what we've based it on. I think, over the last 22 years that we've been around and doing what we're doing, I think that formula and that philosophy has carried throughout the industry. So, by no way are we unique to that philosophy anymore. But at the time, time, it was novel, being out on the road. There weren't as many options. There weren't as many venues and cities to play. So having an outpost that you could tuck into when you were a band traveling, New York, Boston, Montreal, we were kind of in a sweet spot geographically that you could pick up a day on a Tuesday or Wednesday, as you were doing that routing. And it's a great little college market. It's got a good scene going on. It's full of nice people. It's full of a bunch of, sort of progressive music fans. So that's really kind of how we carved out the niche that we did.
You're in an awesome part of the country. It's known for Ben and Jerry's and Fish and Bernie Sanders. Pretty much liberal Democrats running the world. Grateful Dead haven of early days. That's got to lead itself to creative people and music being a forefront of the area, I would assume.
It does. And, also being a college town, anytime you're in a college town, you've got your entire population turning over every 4 years. So it keeps a lot of fresh perspectives, new music ideas, and just young people who are looking to go out and connect with music coming in over and over again. So that helps. We've always said that's probably 50 to 60% of our audience. And then the fact that you've got a town that's been steeped in music. And so, like I mentioned, we've been there almost 23 years. Before us, there was also a rich music tradition within the state, and particularly within the city of Burlington. There was Toast and Metronome and Hunts and the Chants. So for a couple of decades, even before we came along, there were music venues in town that gave a lot of opportunity to both local and kind of national touring bands to come through and play. So even though we're kind of the old guard now, I still feel like we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Like, we wouldn't exist if all those other places that came before us hadn't been there, creating fertile ground, music ground for us to then come and sort of build a slightly better mousetrap of a venue to provide bands to come through. So it's interesting. You mentioned the politics, and I always think it's worth noting because, we are, certainly in Burlington and Chittenden County, which is the county we're in, it's very progressive. But we have a Republican governor, and he just re-won election. I think he re-won it by like 75, 78%. So, even though progressive, Democratic, we've got a Republican conservative governor that, won by an overwhelming amount.
Let's talk about some of your partnerships and some of the venues. Obviously, Higher Ground was a great place to start with that venue. You're also involved with Portland in what you do with Bowery, right?
Correct. Yeah. So back in 2008, maybe early 2009, I'd been poking around in Portland. I had a friend over there, and they said, you got to come do what you did in Burlington and Portland. The Portland music scene is pretty flatlined right now. There aren't any.
And let's clarify that that's Portland, Maine. That's not Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, Portland, Maine. And so I started poking around, and I was looking at one spot, and then all of a sudden there's an old 1929 Art Deco theater in town called the State Theater, and it was shuttered at the time. And all of a sudden we diverted our attention to that, and the folks that owned it at the time were looking to make a change. The theater was shuttered. The city had kind of shut it down. It wasn't really being run properly. And so I started to dive into that project, and the Bowery folks, Jim and Jomo, had just done a theater restoration project in Montclair, New Jersey, the Wellmont. And so I'd known Jomo since before either of us were in the music industry. And, we'd always sort of compared notes and kept up with one another in terms of what each other were doing. And I mentioned this project to him and said, you guys just went through a theater restoration. This thing could end up being a big project. Do you guys have any interest in expanding outside of the New York metro area? And lucky for me, they did have interest. And so we dove into that project. It took us year and a half to renovate the theater and get it back up to a place where we were comfortable with it. And then October 15th, 2010, we reopened it with My Morning Jacket.
You can't get much cooler partners than Jomo and Glancy. The Bowery guys are amazingly cool. And I imagine, based on the timeline, you guys started this long before they had become part of AEG. Between your booking resources and their booking resources, you guys are going to have a good calendar for a room like that. That gave it the best possible chance you possibly could.
Yeah. Like I said, I had a long-term relationship with John before any of this. So, we already had a friendship to base the partnership on. Jim, I didn't know, only through reputation. So, it was a new relationship for me. And I've had a lot of partnerships and a lot of partners throughout the years, and they are two of my favorite partners. We continue to this day to have a lot of mutual respect for one another, and Portland is working well, and it's a fun theater. It's a good size. It's 1,900 capacity. It's a beautiful old theater. It's got great acoustics. We've got great production in there. We can run it pretty affordably, which means, we can pay out well on bands and get a lot of bands through the State Theater that might not otherwise play in 1,900 cap theater. Beck and Jane's Addiction and My Morning Jacket and Alabama Shakes and Brandy Carlisle. So it's nice. It's a nice room to have. And we used to have a small club in the market called Port City Music Hall, which was a 550 cap club that unfortunately has fell to the wayside and was a product of COVID. So that club is no longer around. And then we've got a larger venue called Thompson's Point, which is an outdoor GA venue that scales up to about 7,500.
Okay, and talking about the outside stuff, that's a big part of your world as well. Like, you've been very creative with some of the acts. Wilco, Fish, Boston Calling was part of early days, Osheaga. Like, you've really gotten into that outdoor world between the festivals and outdoor show space. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and some of this is just, each thing kind of happened organically on top of the next. There was never really any game plan for what I wanted to do. I started the club, started Higher Ground when I was 22. And then the first thing I did, another interesting thing about Vermont is that it's the only state in the union without an arena. So we don't have a proper arena here. So we don't have any large scale facilities to do shows in. So we were developing bands, we were developing relationships, and there was this tendency to say, okay, well then what's next? Like a band wanted to keep growing and keep coming back to the market. What do we do? So I found an outdoor venue space at the Shelburne Museum, which is a interesting museum. It's about 7 miles south of Burlington. And so they had some land and there was an appetite to do some stuff there. And so we developed a 3,000 cap outdoor GA lawn setup sort of long before that was in vogue. Again, a lot of these things now, there are these 3,000 to 5,000 cap boutique amphitheaters that are peppered all across the country. But at the time it was kind of new and novel. So I use that as a way to kind of step bands out of the club. And there's a theater in Burlington called the Flynn Theater, which is a PAC here. So either we jump from Higher Ground to the PAC to outdoors, or sometimes, we would just jump straight from a Higher Ground play right outdoors to a 3,000 cap. So
right, because the Flynn's not that big of a PAC and it's a little pricey. So yeah, I imagine the band can probably make almost as much money selling at the Higher Ground as they can playing the beautiful seat PAC, just because it's so small.
That's right. Yeah. So it's 1,432 capacity. So it's a decent size for the market, but in terms of PAC with sort of high overhead and high expenses, it's
you really got to sell it out to make it work. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Shelburne Museum was the first foray. And then from there, we kind of got the model, and we also started to connect with bands who really liked that kind of setting. And so the prime example is Wilco, who'd we done, a few shows with at that point, a couple at the club, then the theater, then the auditorium. And then we did one at Shelburne Museum, and they loved the vibe at the Shelburne Museum so much. We developed a deeper relationship, and we started talking about doing a festival, sort of an artist curated festival. The band is unique in the fact that there's 6 guys in the band. All 6 of them have their own projects that they work on when Wilco's not active. So, we kind of looked for a platform where we could showcase all of their projects, which are widely disparate, in terms of what they do. And the joke was always like, there'd never be a festival that like all of their bands, all of their projects would play on. So we just decided to create one. And so it was a way to put all that together. And then because there's 6.
That's Matt Smoker, right?
Yeah. So we kind of came up with the concept of, okay, we want to do this. Now, where are we going to do it? What's the right place to do it? And the goal was to try to find some place that was a little bit out of the ordinary. The band, I'd done a bunch of different things with the band up until that point. We had done shows in minor league ballparks. We'd done a one-off at Newport Folk. We'd found fields and festivals and all this stuff. So they were a band that wasn't afraid to take chances and try new things and get creative in terms of where they played and how they got presented. And so I stumbled into a relationship with Mass Mocha. This was also in 2008, 2009, and Mass Mocha was doing some music at that point in time, but they weren't doing anything sort of at scale. And I went down there and I looked at the facility and realized like I had a vision for the way we could kind of do something that was more of a festival, multi-day, multi-stage. They were wide open to it and they were great. And so in 2010, we launched Solid Sound, which is the Wilco Festival there at Mass Mocha. And honestly, couldn't have found a better fit for that band having a platform to do a true art and music festival where, I mean, we're in the largest contemporary art museum in the world and we're fully integrated into the mix.
So Wilco is a relationship. There's also a Fish relationship, obviously, that might have to do with proximity, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the Fish relationship started, I mean, it's really the only quote unquote professional job I've had outside of what I've done. So I came to Burlington in 1993 for college. And while I was here, Fish moved their management offices up they were down in the Boston area. And so I don't remember, it was maybe in 94, 95, they moved their management offices up to Burlington to be closer to the band because at that time the whole band was living in the Burlington area. And so when they did that, I reached out and I said, I'm a student at UVM and, if you need anybody to make coffee or make photocopies or help out, I'm interested and I'm probably going to be in the music industry and, I'm just looking for experience. So luckily they responded. I started showing up and doing whatever I could do to be helpful. And it was a fun time, with the band because that was sort of, the band was going through a lot of accelerating. Things were on fire. The band was growing by leaps and bounds. The management team, was a really strong group of people who were doing really interesting, fun things. And one of the projects that had landed, that was sort of coming down the pike and why I ended up being there when I was there and staying on was they launched their first festival, which was the Clifford Ball over in Plattsburgh, New York. So that was fun to kind of just be a fly on the wall and be working there at the management company while, I think the band and management had the expectation that maybe 15,000 people might come to that. And they ended up selling 60,000 plus tickets to it. And again, it's hard to conceive of it now because there's a million festivals and they range from 5,000 to 100,000 people. And there's a formula and there's people and there's staff and there's professional services and there's systems for it. Like none of that existed in the mid 90s. This was the first time anyone had ever done anything like this in the US. I mean, this predates Coachella and Bonnaroo and, Lollapalooza as a festival, the touring.
So there wasn't a level of standard in America because there was certainly a festival system in the UK and Europe before this, but obviously in America, the festivals that had played, the Woodstocks, had all gone kind of incredibly wrong. So there was really no standard to live up to because nothing ever worked.
That's right. There's the Woodstock and the Watkins Glen and Newport Folk and Newport Jazz. And then there was, the New Orleans Discover Jazz Heritage Festival and then maybe like the Playboy Jazz and Aspen. I mean, there were
Monterey, what have you. Please don't email if you were with Monterey Jazz or whatever. Like, I know things worked. I'm kidding. I don't want the emails.
Yeah. I mean, there were a few. I'm not saying there was nothing, but like the modern American music festival that we know now, like basically did not exist here. You're exactly right, though. Like Fish went and toured the European festival model and they saw what was going on over there. They saw what was happening. They played New Orleans Jazz and Heritage. They loved the vibe of what that festival was doing in terms of like incorporating local culture and food. And so they set out to, kind of build their own mousetrap. And in the process of that, they kind of laid the groundwork for what then became, all the modern American music festivals that we know and love today.
All right. So let's go back for a second. You were a college student and you reached out to Fish's team and said, I want to be in the business. I'm going to be in the business. I'm available for grunt work. I just want to be involved. Yeah. I think there's something to really highlight there that's how you got involved was you reached out and said, I'm here and I want to be involved. Teach me. For people listening that want to get involved with the business, I think that's a really important lesson. Holding your hand up and saying, I want to be involved is a great place to start.
Yeah. And I'd done a few things prior to that. I'd worked in New York City at a record label at RCA Records in the A&R department for a summer. I'd been out on the road with the band for a summer doing tour management and working like for the home management. I'd booked bands in high school. So, I had dabbled in a couple of different areas of the industry, not really knowing kind of where I was going to land. I actually thought I was probably going to land on the label side of things, doing A&R. But then, again, I was in Burlington, which is a great town, but it's a small town. So the music business opportunities are few and far between, especially at that time. So all of a sudden, when Fish moved up here and had their management offices here, I saw it as an opportunity to be useful and to be helpful and just put my hand up and try to learn.
You mentioned that you knew Jomo before you guys both got into music. How did that happen?
Well, we met through my brother, I think, initially. My brother was down in Virginia shooting bands. He's a photographer. So he was shooting kind of all the bands that were coming through the Mid-Atlantic, and Jomo was down in Richmond, Virginia, and Jomo was taping all the shows that were coming through that area. And so my brother and Jomo would trade tapes and photos. And then I was a taper. So I was taping all the shows in the Northeast. So I was spending all my time on the road, chasing bands all over the Northeast, taping them. And so my brother introduced me to Jomo, and then Jomo and I started trading tapes. I'd mail him tapes, in padded envelopes, XL2Ss, and I'd send him stuff that I would tape up in the Northeast.
This is Slayer and Megadeth and Cannibal Corpse?
No, it was mostly mid-level jam bands.
I'm shocked.
A few other things too, but mostly mid-level jam bands. And so we started a relationship trading tapes, and then I was starting to get into the music industry, and I think he was interested in getting in, and we just built a friendship. And he said, I kind of want to get in the music industry. And he said, what should I do? I said, I'd just go start making coffee for somebody.
And just go start making coffee. I like that. Now, speaking of the guys from Bowery, you were also involved with helping launch Osheaga, which is Eventco, and you're tight with those guys too. How did that relationship come about?
So we're about an hour and a half. Burlington is about an hour and a half south of Montreal. So it's definitely our biggest metropolis. Montreal is a top 10 North American city. And a lot of the bands that I wanted to see who weren't playing Burlington were playing. So I started going up there a lot in college and then post-college. And then once I launched Higher Ground, I got connected with the promoter up there, Nick Farkas. At the time, it was a different company. So someone connected us and we became fast friends. And so, I would go up there a lot and he'd come down to Burlington some. And then we started partnering on some shows together. So we did a handful of things and we continue to do stuff today. And again, early days of like the festival scene that was building and brewing, we started scheming like, there should be a big major contemporary music festival in Montreal. And Montreal, for those who know Montreal is rich and dense with festivals. They've got a comedy festival, they've got a jazz festival, they got like a world music festival, they have fireworks festivals. I mean, there's festivals, of all shapes and sizes there, but they didn't really have like a contemporary music festival. So we schemed on that and launched that. And I was involved for the first 2 years, and the thing was such a colossal bloodbath the first couple of years that they were gracious enough to let me walk away.
I got to say, I went, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I don't know that I've had catering as good at that festival as I've had at any event in my life. Like the music was amazing. The Chili Peppers headlined, the bands all day long were amazing. But the backstage experience is enough to make acts come regardless of anything else. It was the highest level I've ever seen. It's such a cool event that they've built that's really become. I mean, it's got to be something you guys got to be very proud of what it's become.
The first couple of years, it obviously wasn't anything like that. And then those guys, really, they figured out the formula and they sunk a lot of time and effort and money into making the backstage hang, sort of par none in this country. And, they're always like the hospitality there is always over the top and they're very generous. It's one of my favorite festivals, even though I don't have anything to do with it anymore. It's still one of my favorite festivals to go to every year.
Great hang. Let's jump to Mexico. You've gotten to dabble down there as well.
Yeah. So another Wilco event. I've done a couple things in Mexico over the years, but the Wilco event's the most recent thing I've done. We've got Solid Sound. Solid Sound's an interesting festival at Mass Mocha. It happens every other year. So it's on a unique circuit in terms of timing. And that gives us time to like lie fallow and create some new ideas and bring some new energy to it. And then, there are these travel destination festivals that have been popping up for the last decade plus of all different shapes and sizes. Some of them are on cruise ships, and then a lot of them are destinations, in places like Mexico. So through the Bowery folks, there's another company that's been producing them down there for a while called Cloud9, and they've got a great relationship with the resort. They've got a good system in place. They've got good staffing. And so there was an idea to build one around Wilco. And so we did one basically a year ago. So January of 2020.
Oh, right before the shutdown, you got one in. Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, we got the first one in. So, and it was, it's all stuff that's curated with the band, and it's Courtney Barnett and Kamasi Washington, Dr. Dog. A few of the band's other projects also played, which is always a nice, way to incorporate stuff, because, the Wilco fans are, they tend to be very deeply, spiritual music people. They have like really great musical taste, and they like, even though Wilco is their favorite band, they have a lot of latitude, and they love sort of all the other projects that the different band members are in as well.
It's really cool that your relationship with the acts have allowed you to get creative in these events that have taken you to other places beyond your region. Obviously, interaction with management and the agent and the artist themselves to cultivate something like that really takes the relationship to the next level.
It is fun. It's completely outside the normal purview of booking a festival. When you book kind of a traditional festival in the US, you look for whoever the biggest, hottest bands are, of that year, or like if you're booking it, what you're hoping is 12 months from now. So, it's driven by concert grosses and radio play and SoundCloud spins and everything else you use as metrics. With the artist curated festivals, because I do 5 or 6 of them, we don't pay any attention to that. Not that we discount it, but it's never the driving factor. It's primarily, especially with the Wilco Festival, because, the Wilco Festival, Wilco can sort of carry the festival on their own. So everything we get to book on the Wilco Festival is just stuff that the band is excited to play with, and that we're excited to sort of package together. And we get to expose, the people who are coming to a whole broad range of music that, a lot of them have never even heard of before.
So you're producing 600 events a year, and let's asterisk this year being a COVID year. Normally, you're doing 600 events a year. The sheer volume, the sheer accounting, the sheer amount of details involved with producing that many shows requires a staff that's just so well oiled and on top of their game. How do you guys just roll through that much volume? I mean, truly 600 settlements is an amazing amount of accounting within itself.
It's true. And I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of it has to do with really good staff and just really good systems. And I've been doing it for a long time. So, we certainly have made plenty of blunders along the way that we've hopefully fixed. But a lot of those are club shows, right? So, a club, for those who are listening who don't understand, club economics are tough. In fact, they're rough, so anything sub 1,000 capacity, is basically a labor of love. And
what's the higher ground capacity? Just to clarify.
There's 2 rooms at higher ground. There's a 750 cap room and a 300 cap room, and they can operate simultaneously.
And you can seat the either room too, right? With a lower cap?
Yeah, that's right. So we do them seated because, again, it's a smaller market. So there's not, in bigger markets, you've got rooms of all sizes. You've got seated rooms, you've got standing room rooms, you've got blues rooms, jazz rooms. So one of the things that's been kind of fun for us in Burlington with the room is that, we kind of book everything in that room because it's one of the only rooms, except for, what we talked about with the Flynn being a larger capacity PAC. But, we do jazz and blues and punk and folk and rock and electronic and country, so we book a pretty wide range of stuff through that room, which has been, which makes it fun and exciting and keeps us on our toes. But sort of back to the economics. So anything sub 1,000 capacity is just basically a labor of love. And so, part of how you make the economics of a club of that size work, is just keeping your show count up and trying to pay those overheads. So, of those 600 shows, 300 of them are playing at higher ground. So, half the show count is coming from those 2 rooms at higher ground. And then, the State Theater does 100 shows a year. When you've got venues that you sort of own and operate and that you're booking in-house, all of a sudden, like, getting to that number isn't as daunting as it seems, because that's the number you sort of need to get to anyway.
Right. So that's 400 shows of the 600 are in-house owned and operated venues. So that rolls a little easier.
Yeah.
Okay. But still, you're producing 200 shows outside your venues then.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, obviously it's like the bigger shows, the ones that were four-walling in places, the festivals. I mean, those take an inordinate amount of your energy and your time, and then the club shows, like you've got systems, you've got staff, you've got a roof over your head, you've got power, anything, all the stuff that we do in terms of the artist curated festivals or the stuff that are outdoor concert series, it's just like generators and portalets and staff and production people and weather. And, it's just every one of those is just a lot of work and a lot of lift, but you end up with a nice experience at the end because you're also not in like an amphitheater that's all branded.
So the Evenco guys made a deal with Live Nation. The Bowery guys made a deal with AEG. A lot of the other indies that have been around as long as you have found deals. You're one of the last surviving indies that have been doing it as long as you have. Have you thought about possibly taking a deal at some point? Or is the indie world where you want to live for the rest of your career?
I mean, I would never rule anything out, but I'm happy. We never set out. I never set out to conquer the world. Like I said, I sort of accidentally fell into what I was doing. I thought I was heading in a different direction. Started Higher Ground at 22. Here we are 22 and a half years later. We've had some nice gradual organic growth. We get to work with some artists that we really enjoy working with. We get to work with some management teams that we really enjoy working with, some agents. One of the things that's been nice is as we've grown and sort of matured, I guess, as a company is, we get to work with the people we want to work with, and we don't have to chase every show, and we don't have to necessarily, just book 100, shows because, we've got a fill show count, even though I know what I just said prior to this, it runs a little contrary to that. But the club stuff is, like the club stuff we're happy to do because the club stuff is all artist development. Primarily it's artist development. And artist development, I mean, for anybody who's in this business or who got into it the way I got into it, it's like, that's what keeps me going day after day. It's like, that's what I love. I love like working with that artist or finding the artist, when they're young and you get really excited about them. And then you get to like participate in this really small way in helping them move from a 300 cap room to a 750 cap room to a 1500 cap room to 6,000 people outdoors to then, if they move into the pop sphere, into much, much larger levels of success. So, I mean, that's the part that just like keeps your juices going and gets you excited every day. And the club stuff is where all that kind of stuff happens. But beyond that, we don't have there's nothing driving us to have to book any shows beyond that. We get to kind of work on the things we get to work on and we get to pick and choose. And that's a fine place to be for me. Let's
talk about COVID for a second. I know I told you we probably weren't going to go there, but you did mention that one of your venues fell victim to COVID. So I want to talk about that. Is you got mortgages and leases on venues and multiple venues, surviving this year break, at least possibly longer. That's got to play into your thought decision on what venues you continue to reinvest in and what venues aren't going to make their way through the end of this. So that's got to add a second level of stress, not just moving shows, but your staff, your venue, your lease, your mortgage. Like the psyche of that has got to play on a different level. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been a roller coaster, right? So at the beginning of the pandemic, there was just all the anxiety of what does this mean for our industry? Where is it going? Are we going to survive? And then dealing with the staff. And, I've been proud to say we've kept all of our staff on. We haven't let anybody go. We've taken some reductions in salary to get through. The PPP money we got certainly helped. There were some state grant funding mechanisms that we got in Vermont and in Maine that helped us, bridge. And then, of course, the SOS Act just passed a couple of weeks ago as part of the most recent stimulus package. So fingers crossed that the SOS package is going to pay out the way it's designed and really be able. I mean, we've got just a mountain of debt, like almost insurmountable mountain of debt that's been piling up because, we've had zero revenue. We've been closed for 10 months. So, we've got a mountain of back rent and other debt that's just been piling up. And thankfully we've had some landlords and some, banks that have been comfortable giving us some latitude to get there. And so hopefully the SOS Act is going to, solve some of those problems because again, to your point, we're probably still 8 months, 9 months, 10 months out from getting back to what was in terms of just, we can probably have some shows in the summer and maybe we can have some shows in the fall. But in terms of what the level that we were operating at prior to COVID. It's going to take 10 months to get back there, maybe longer. So yeah, I mean, that was the problem with Port City, the venue over in Portland, Maine, the 550 cap club venue is, we had rent that was mounting, and we had a landlord over there that wasn't able to give us any latitude. So, we had to make the hard decision to walk away from that. And, what I think some people don't realize is for those of us who are independents and sort of more of the entrepreneurial side of things, like, we personally guarantee these leases, right? So when we sign a 5-year lease on a building to come in, whether it's a club or a theater, and we're operating it, like we're personally putting like our house, car, we're putting all that on the line to make that stuff happen. And, sometimes I think that gets lost.
I mean, that's every time you're rolling the dice on a new venue, you're putting everything on the line because you're personally taking that risk. That's amazing amount of stress, but extra-minimal amount of, okay, do I really need to do this? Like, the risk there is amazing. Are you a member of NIVA?
I am, yeah.
Okay, and you also mentioned that you were part of an independent promoter call right before this call.
Yeah, so that's called the IPA, the Independent Promoter Alliance. And that really focuses specifically on just talent buyers and promoters. So independent talent buyers and promoters. So that one's sort of highly specialized. And that also was...
And this all came about after COVID, right? That didn't exist.
Correct. Yeah. That was born out of the pandemic as well. So yeah, with NIVA, I've been pretty active with NIVA. They kind of created a precinct captain system where, people from every state, who had relationships with their Congress people could reach out. And, in Vermont, we've got Bernie Sanders, Senator Leahy, who chairs the House Appropriations Committee. So, he's very important in terms of deciding like where money goes. And then Congressman Peter Welch, who ended up, so we called Congressman Peter Welch at the beginning of this and said, hey, I don't know whether you've really tuned into what's going on with our industry, but first to close, last to reopen, a lot of gating issues before we actually get back up and running. And, the arts, performing arts are really critically important to a state like Vermont. Music tourism is a big part of our tourism economy here. And so he got it right away. And he actually ended up becoming a co-sponsor of the bill and introducing it into the House. So he's been championing the bill almost since day one. So we owe him a huge debt of gratitude for the fact that this thing actually got to the finish line.
So between the stress of COVID, you were working every day on figuring out how to help get these bills across and how to get the right in the right hands, and working with all the other club owners and agents and what have you, NIVA, whatever. You were strategizing to help get this bill to the finish line, which hopefully now you guys see some relief from that now that it's passed.
That's the hope. I mean, details are still pretty scant on, how it's going to roll out and what the application process is going to be and what the timeline is, which is, we've got a lot of venues around the country and promoters that are hanging on by their fingernails. I also have some concerns that it's going to be wildly oversubscribed. There's a lot of people who are participating in the SOS bucket of funds. So, we have to wait and see. I don't really know. I mean, hopefully it's enough money to take care of everybody.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing is it looked like online when it got through the House and the Senate that everybody was suddenly a millionaire. And I think people don't realize the language that's involved is going to be a very small piece of what the revenue you guys lost that you're going to get back. Hopefully it's enough to get you to the finish line, but it's not going to make you whole.
No. And again, I don't think anybody who crafted the legislation, and certainly nobody on NIVA's end, no one's looking. I mean, everything we've been doing, I'll just speak from my own personal, like we launched a drive-in this summer, right? Because we were actually trying to solve a problem for the local area high schools who needed a way to graduate. They needed a socially distanced way to graduate. So that propelled us to basically build a drive-in model that we used for that as a solution. And then we decided to keep it up through the summer and then into the fall. And, we ran some bands through there, and it scratched an itch for, artists and patrons, through the summer and fall of the pandemic. And that was nice to do, but again, not a business model. And so we decided as we launched it, not even to come at it from a business model perspective, and just agreed right up front to donate all net proceeds to a local nonprofit here called the Vermont Arts Council, which makes micro grants, I should say, to Vermont artists. So, you can't make rent this month. You need to buy groceries. You've got an emergency vet bill. You fill out a very simple, one-page application, and they give you a micro grant. So we did, I think, 29 shows at the drive-in. We mostly ran it as just a pass-through. I think at the end of those 29 shows, we had $18,000 or $19,000 left over. And so we just wrote a check to the Vermont Arts Council. So no one in the world that I'm existing in is looking at making money right now. Everyone's just looking to survive, pay their obligations, pay their rent, pay their interest payments, pay their staff, and then basically get back up and start running again as soon as we can.
So the only thing that you did show-wise that brought in revenue and did net a profit, you gave the money away to a nonprofit for all the work that you did this year.
That's correct.
You're fucking saint, man. Good on you. That's really incredible. I want to thank you for taking the time. There are so many independents out there, and I think the independent story is particularly one that hasn't gotten covered much. I think everyone's talking about the venues that are struggling to get through, and I think the independents are out there by themselves and not talking about that much. So I think shining a light on what some of the independents are going through right now in particular is really important. I want to thank you for making time and talking to us. It's an amazing thing that you've built up there between your different relationships, the different venues, the hybrid of the festivals, and your artist relationships. It's quite a career that you've put together, Alex.
Well, thanks. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me on, and it's always a blast talking to you, Dan.
Alex is just a bro. Thrilled to have him here. He does everything with the best possible vibe and intention. There's a reason why artists keep coming back to his venues. He just does it right.
This is Bob Rue with Live Nation, and I'm on Promoter 101.
The quote of the week comes to us from Walt Disney. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. Some deep shit there, Luke.
Some real deep shit.
Hi, this is Jake Sufnerowski from Rocks Off, New York City's sweetest independent concert promoter, and you're listening to Promoter 101.
All right, everybody, the first episode of 2021. You made it. You're here. Episode 222 of Promoter 101 in the bag. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our guest today, all the way in from New England, Alex Crothers, and the First Avenue's Dana Frank coming on the podcast. Thank you to Dana, to NIVA, to Nito, to everyone that had a huge hand in passing a monumental piece of legislation to do a lot of great work for people. Everybody go check out Save Our Stages and see what's in that bill for the music business. That'll do it this week. If you like what you heard this week, please let us know. Keep in touch with Dan and I. You can hit us at Steiny@promoter101.net.
Luke, did you notice that there's a new TV show called Call Your Mother? I'm wondering if we get some kind of royalty for this.
I mean, there's got to be some sort of common law royalty for saying something on a podcast for a couple of years, and then instantly we get recording rights for it. I'm sure that kind of rules out there, right?
It seems like it should be. Anyway, we're very excited about the next episode, and there will be a next episode. We have a very special crossover episode. All of the hosts, all 7 of them from TM 101 will be here talking about their amazing podcast. And I got to tell you, that one's a humdinger of a show. Thrilled to have some of the best production managers, tour managers in the world right here on our humble little show, Luke.
That's it. That's it for Promoter 101. Cheers, and of course, call your mother.
This is Emma Banks. I work at Creative Artists Agency, and this is Promoter 101.